Denver Police Chief Robert White announced on Wednesday the department's new use of force policy set to take effect on March 1st. The new policy instructs officers to implement de-escalation tactics, limiting the use of weapons when dealing with citizens. And the policy has been criticized by the police union and citizens alike for failure to include outside input in the initial draft. Patty, this feels like something where the Denver police are trying to do something right and still find a way to possibly do it wrong. What do you think?
Well, it's not the policy that's the problem so much, it's the process that led to it. And if there's been a major problem with the Hancock administration, it's been that they are not transparent. They do not take public input. They don't talk about what they're doing. I thought the Denver Sheriff's Department had learned a pretty good lesson with Patrick Furman. They really, I mean, they were as public could be and maybe had way too many studies and way too many hearings, but at least when they came through with their new policies, everyone thought they'd had a say. Obviously, communities care. The police union cares. You need to have that input. Even if you're going to ignore it, you need to collect it. So it's ironic that it's a pretty good policy. Even Nick Mitchell, the independent monitor, says looks pretty good, except maybe for some language. But he wasn't advised in advance of what was coming down. So maybe a B for the policy, a D for the process.
Craig, as a former member of the Denver District Attorney's Office, you have a unique perspective here. What do you think of the new policy announced, and then how they should go about any possible public input?
Well, there are some politics involved. You mentioned one, Nick. I'd mention Nick Rogers, head of the largest police union. He says he wasn't consulted. He's upset with the policy. Normally, cops like to be aggressive. This is sort of telling them to back off. The new game changer in my mind, and why this is announced now, is Beth McCann, who will take over for Mitch Morrissey come next Tuesday. Beth McCann criticized the Denver police and criticized Mitch Morrissey. And she's made it clear with Lamar Sims, who I worked with, Doug Jackson, who I worked with, both veteran chief deputies were involved in the decision-making, which always seemed to be in favor of the police who did the shooting. They are not going to be retained by Beth McCann. That word just came down. So there's a new day in Denver with a new Denver district attorney, and Beth McCann will be different than Mitch Morrissey, and I expect she had some input into the police making these changes.
Eric, we've talked around this table many times, especially you with some great analysis about the optics of a situation. From what this looks like right now, how could the optics be improved from this policy and its display for public input?
Oh, I think Patty was probably right here in terms of bifurcating this into the substance of the policy and the process. In defense of the process, and I'm not usually one to jump to the defense of the Hancock administration, but in defense, when you talk, Dominic, about an initial draft, there's a key word in that phrase, which is draft. This is not a final document. It is a draft. Now people are able to react to that draft, which isn't wholly inappropriate. Craig, I think, hit the nail on the head in terms of the transition that is taking place next week in the district attorney's office. This is a necessary transition. 12 years is a long time. And whether or not Mitch Morrissey's course of action and the chief deputies that Craig mentioned, whether that has been correct in a case-by-case basis, it is time for a fresh look. It is time for a fresh start in that office. So this is a healthy, necessary changeover. The key here, as I think all of us understand, is finding the sweet spot. You don't, and the policy seems to try to do that, which is not just that cops need to follow the letter of the law, but that there needs to be some human judgment of not just is it legal, but is it necessary, is it rational, is it appropriate. But at the same time, you don't want to handcuff cops so much that you end up with Chicago and other situations where the violence, which was already at high levels, just continues to escalate because cops are basically sitting on their hands for lack of public support. Finding the sweet spot is the key.
That's a good point. We should remind our viewers that if you'd like to send input to Denver Police, you can send it to dpdplanning@denvergov.org. Natasha, you and 5280 have done some fantastic work looking at police issues, police force, a lot of stuff, especially in 2016. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, I think that email you just put up there is probably the most important. If people feel like the process was incorrect and they have input, they should give it at this time. Absolutely. We can bicker about whether it was done correctly or not, but regardless, do we want a better policy? If we want a better policy, tell our police department what they should do about it. Some things that I like about the use of force changes is that there's talk about emotional intelligence. Let's use our brains to pick what the right use of force is in a situation. It's looking not only what you can do, but what is necessary, what is appropriate for a setting. And I think those are the type of terms and phrases that anyone involved in this situation can probably rally around and find a common point on. So I guess that's what I would encourage people to do at this point, and maybe chalk this up in the lesson learned. Let's not do this next time, but let's take this as a moment to really build something the city can be proud of.